Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with random reviews from the Overflow room. And this is a very exciting day for all you Overflowers because I've just spent the past 2 days packing up the old Overflow room for the big move to the new Overflow room. I've been doing it very gradually, but actually now I have no choice. I've been told to pick up and get out. And so I have about 60 or 70 boxes of CDs that are all going to be coming this way. Big moving boxes, like large moving boxes of things. And they're all coming here. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life putting them away. But they're all in alphabetical order. Oh, I'm so excited because I made sure the only way to do it was to pack it myself. You can't trust anybody else to do it right. And so I did it with my partner. Sean was loyally there by my side, lifting and lugging things around, and we got it done. And so that's going to happen soon, and you'll be soon seeing this room full of boxes. We'll be going through them piece by piece. It's going to be exciting, actually, because there's stuff in there I haven't seen in years. In fact, I can show you. I have been moving things. If we go into the other room here, which is where like the books and the scores are. Remember, we took a look here. See, here's books and scores. These are all scores. We go on this side, and see more scores and scores. But here are bins full of CDs. Those are mostly box sets. Something like 9 or 10 large plastic storage bins full of box sets. And the rest of this stuff here is all going to get filled in. You see here, it's getting filled in rather nicely, but we've been doing it very gradually. But now we have to sort of pick up the pace and get industrial about it. But it's okay. We will get it done, and it's going to be very exciting. So, where are we? We're in the R's. We're in the R's, and, Rossini, mostly. But we have a tiny prelude to Rossini, and the tiny prelude is Rostropovich. Because, there was a Rostropovich edition on EMI, and it had all of his, his Tchaikovsky Symphony Cycle and his other EMI recordings, and it had his song recitals with Galina Vishnevskaya, his wife, and all kinds of other stuff. But here is his concerto thing. Now it's all in a box upstairs. We've talked about that too. So this is just what have we got here. We've got the Dvorak Cello Concerto with Giulini and the Brahms Double Concerto. That's like totally hot with Cell. And Haydn's Cello Concertos in blocks Shlomo and the Strauss Don Quixote with Karajan and the Mayakovsky Cello Concerto in C minor. That's what's in this little box. And I had it separate under the R's in case for some reason I needed to look there. That's Rostropovich. Now we can talk about Rossini. Now Rossini is, I think, one of the most underrated and fascinating musicians in the entire 19th century. He really was, because he was on both sides of the 19th century. That's what's so cool. He was one of the great composers of the classical era. Think about it. Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, and Rossini. He's always the one people leave out when they talk about the great composers of the classical period. He was the great opera composer, besides Mozart, of course, of the classical era. And he basically retired in 1828-29, at the same time that Schubert died and Beethoven died, and the classical era ended, and Rossini's opera career ended. And then he sort of dribbled along for a couple of decades doing very little, and then he was reborn as a composer for the piano and of salon pieces and chamber works in the 1850s and 60s. And that's extraordinary. No one else had a career like that. And although he was not what you might call a romantic by any stretch of the imagination, he actually would have done wonders as a neoclassicist. He almost was one. He was just so interesting. And I became fascinated with Rossini because because when I was doing my research into vibrato notation and whatnot, I thought Rossini, along with Gluck, would be a really good guy to look at, because Rossini's scores are fanatically detailed. There are whole scads of repetition and things where he just writes ditto marks and things like that and doesn't even write the parts. But for the most part, he was obsessive compulsive. He really had OCD. He was so obsessive that he used to tell his musicians how far from their candles and the music stands had to be and where they had to sit. And, he was really, really detailed about certain things. And so I thought that, as with most of these things, the real place to find out whether or not composers notated vibrato and whether they did in orchestral music and what was going on would be to look at scores and to look at operatic scores particularly scores of accompanied recitative, where people talk about fear and trembling and shaking and all of this stuff. Instead of looking at these stupid little German violin treatises, look at what the composers really wrote and what they told their players to do. And sure enough, if you look at Rossini's scores, you find all kinds of places where he's indicating that you should be using vibrato, just as you do way back in the Baroque and classical periods. It's all over the place. All over the place. And it's all over the place in a very interesting way, because sometimes composers indicated it, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes their copyists put it in, sometimes they didn't. All of which means that people were doing it all over the place, and you didn't even have to write it down necessarily. You did at places where you were really desperate that everybody should hear the orchestra really quiver. But of course, the place to look at it would be where people sing about Io tremo, with wild coloratura on the O. Io tremo. You see those little wavy lines all over the place. It's really fun and it's interesting. And what fascinates me, and it really rams home just how impractical some of these period performance theorists are when it comes to what people actually did back in the day. They don't look at music that talks about it. I mean, we're full of operatic texts talking about cruelty and trembling and fear and shaking and heaving. And if ever any place there's going to be that kind of ornamentation, vibrato, it would be there, right? Well, yeah, it is. But they don't bother to check, and they don't care. Anyway, so I looked in Rossini scores, and I started collecting the critical edition of all the Rossini scores, which were edited by Philip Gossett, who was a brilliant force of nature and a fabulous musicologist, originally a Rameau scholar, actually. And he was in charge at the University of Chicago of the complete Rossini edition and the complete Verdi edition and the Donizetti and all the bel canto stuff he was working on. He wrote several books which are just marvelous, essential reading if you're interested in any of the music of the period, particularly as it comes to how musicologists have to evaluate texts to create critical editions of these operas, which really only existed in terms of fluid performing versions in handwritten manuscripts for decades and decades and centuries even, until they finally got published. And then when they got published, they were published in Baudelaireized editions. And now that he's gone, he passed away a few years ago, and I'm not sure what's going on with these critical editions. He had with him a very, very dedicated and knowledgeable group of people working on these scores, but he was such a powerful force, influencing all of this. I don't know exactly where they're going. I would be curious to find out, because the Rossini edition has been taken up by, I think, Barenreiter now, and they're publishing the rest of it. It was originally done by the Rossini Foundation in Pizarro, and there were all kinds of politics involved and folderol, but Gossett was a great guy, and I got in touch with him, and he reviewed my work and was extremely encouraging in my view on what the vibrato meant and when people used it and what they did with it and all of those things. I mean, he was really, really positive about it, and I'm very, very grateful to him. But beyond that, we had a lot of discussions about Rossini's notation, because he had very interesting notational habits. For example, he had a long crescendo, decrescendo mark with a cutoff at the end of it. It went, it looked like a V with a thing like this at the end. And no one knows what that means. Nobody. Nobody knows exactly what Rossini had in mind by that. But he was amazingly detailed, and these scores reproduce all this notation. You've got to sort of work it out in practical performance, see what happens. So I've got a bunch of Rossini videos here, about 4 or 5. I think 5 of them we'll probably do, and we'll take it from there. So let's just get started, shall we, with the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 operas. Rossini was a comic opera composer first and foremost, but he also wrote lots of other stuff, and he was great at writing tragedy and other things, works that don't get that much attention, and they deserve more than they get because he was wonderful at that. Although he was violently opposed to critical editions of his work because he thought that, the failures he accepted and took the good bits and reused them later. And so he didn't want a critical edition. He didn't want people to know where the best bits of some of his more popular operas came from, like the failure operas. But it doesn't matter. He wrote 28, 30 some odd operas. I don't know, there's a whole pile of them. There's a wonderful edition of all the Rossini operas now on Naxos. We have to go through it at some point. One of these, my projects for this channel is to go through all the Rossini operas. And that's a long-term thing we'll do one of these years. But he was, as an opera composer, one of the leading lights, the greatest in the classical era, and then leading into the Romantic era, inventing French grand opera with William Tell and his other things for Paris. So, wow, baby. Here we go. Il Viaggio a Rams. Now, this is a very important recording. This was the rediscovered Il Viaggio a Rams. The piece is one of those festa teatrale things. Nothing happens in it. A bunch of people are going to Rams for a coronation. That's what it was written for. And they never get there. They all hang out at the train station and sing a lot about whatever they're doing. And there are incredible, wonderful arias and set pieces, including his grand something or whatever for 13 singers and whatnot that he later reused in the Comte d'Orly, which we will see in a moment. And this was the premiere recording under Claudio Abbado of the rediscovered and finished critical edition, which was, of course, edited by Philip Gossett. And then Abbado, by the way, when he went to Sony, remade this with half of the same cast, which was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in my life. I think I have it here somewhere, maybe upstairs. I don't know, I have it. And it was such a disrespectful and discourteous thing to do to Deutsche Grammophon. He was so narcissistic about that stuff. But anyway, the cast includes Cecilia Gazdia, Lucia Valentini Terrani, Lilia Kuberli, Katia Ricciarelli, Eduardo Jimenez, Francisco Araiza, Samuel Ramey, Rogero Raimonde, and Enzo Dara. Anybody who could sing Rossini in those days, with the Prague Philharmonic Chorus and the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. It's absolutely marvelous music. The story is pointless, but boy, the music is great. So there's Il Viaggio. Then we've got the Comte d'Orly, which is, recently again restored to its full extravagance based on the fact that Rossini reused a lot of the music from Il Viaggio a Rams, and now we can put it all back together. This is a wonderful performance with John Aller, Gilles Cachamay, Diana Montague, Gino Quilico, Sumi Joe, and other people like that, under John Elliott Gardner, of all people, with the Orchestre de Lyon, one of his French comic confections. It's about, a count, he dresses as a nun, and, there's someone dressed as a nun. And it's very funny, and it's delicious, and one of the 3 big Paris productions. The other was The Siege of Corinth, and then, of course, the original thing that he wrote that had no predecessors in his Italian work, and that was William Tell, his last major opera, the one that was so exhausting and so big and so long that he just gave up. And that was that. La Cazza Ladra, the Thieving Magpie. This is quite a piece. It really is. It's famous from the overture, right? Da 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 bum bum ba da 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 da. Famous in The Clockwork Orange. That scene where the woman gets killed, and her husband is tortured, and she gets murdered with that phallic sculpture thing in her living room. And yeah, anyway, that's La Gazza Ladra. But what a great, it's based on a true story about a sweet, innocent country girl who's condemned to death because they claim she stole some jewelry, but it was the magpie that stole the jewels. And, the podesta, the mayor of the town, has the hots for her, and she's refusing his advances, so he's condemning her to death, and he's trying to blackmail her into sleeping with him. And it's big. It's a big, long, tragic, comic thing that no one pays any attention to. And really, it's just marvelous. But it's like, how long is it? It should have the timing here. It's incredibly, incredibly long. It's only in 2 acts, but it lasts like 3 hours and something. It's really extraordinary. Amazing piece. And, like I said, Rossini is just full of surprises. Astonishing richness and melodic genius. He's melodic fecundity, as they call it in the business. He was fecund. It doesn't sound very healthy, does it? But yes, you can write the tunes. The Turk in Italy with Samuel Ramey, Montserrat Caballé, Enzo Dara, Ernesto Palacio, Leo Nucci, Jane Berbier, and Paolo Barbaccini with Riccardo Chailly and the National Philharmonic. These are all based on critical editions of Rossini scores. So much of this stuff is out of print now. It's important that we get it out there and talk about it because, these were as good as brand new works in these recordings. So they're finally being rediscovered. Bianca e Faliaro, well, this is live, with Katia Ricciarelli and Marilyn Horne and Chris Merritt, and Donato Renzetti is the conductor with the London Sinfonietta Opera Orchestra. This was recorded, live by the RAI in 1986. And of course, Marilyn Horne was one of the great leaders of the Rossini revival because she could sing coloratura with more notes per second than any human being alive. And she had this very interesting voice. She was technically a mezzo-soprano, but she really just billed herself as a soprano because she could sing anything from like up here to down there. She had this great chest voice. And she was just, probably very close in vocal range, I don't know about timbre, to Rossini's wife, the great mezzo Isabella Colbrand, for whom he wrote many of his heroines. And so she ran around she did all the trouser rolls and whatnot. And it was really extraordinary. Then we've got Zelmira. Here's a Rossini opera nobody knows about. I wish I could go through all the plots of these. It would really be kind of fun. With Gazdia, Bernarda Fink, William Matteuzzi, Chris Merritt, Jose Garcia, really a good cast. This is Claudio Scimoni with I Solisti Venetti. So that's exciting. And last but not least for this pile, because this has turned into a long little chat, The Italian Woman in Algiers. This is the Abato recording with Rogero Raimondi and Patrizia Pace and Anna Gonda and Alessandro Corbelli, Frank Lepardo, and Isabella Agnes Balza, one of her greatest recordings, actually. And Enzo Dara. I used to not like this very much, but then I listened to it pretty carefully, and it's pretty terrific. It really is. I'm a partisan of the Marilyn Horne recording, which we've talked about previously, I believe. But it's still pretty fantastic. And what a delicious opera. Oh my God, it's funny. The Act 1 finale, where everybody is reduced to like animal noises, is one of the great comic effusions in the universe of opera. So there's lots more Rossini to come. And I am telling you, I know Rossini takes time and there are titles you haven't heard and all kinds of stuff, but my goodness, he was a genius. And it's just extraordinary music. Absolutely wonderful and brilliant and fun above all. And I like fun. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.